Yanis Varoufakis is uniquely placed to provide insight on the extraordinary developments we've seen in Trump's first 2 weeks back in the White House. Yes, it has only been 2 weeks. As a former Greek finance minister during the Eurozone crisis, Yanis has first-hand experience of the kind of high-level brinkmanship Trump is pursuing with his neighbours. And as an academic economist, he was a vocal critic of the imbalanced global trading system, which Trump is apparently trying to upend. Do they have something in common there? And as an author and political commentator, he has theorized the rising power of a Silicon Valley elite. In his 2023 book, Varoufakis suggested we were entering a period called techno-feudalism, or which he calls techno-feudalism. Now, if that book had been published 2 years later, that infamous photo of Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos standing together at Trump's inauguration could surely have been a perfect fit for the cover of that techno-feudalism. You've got the three richest men in the world, all tech oligarchs with the president. In this conversation with Yanis, we cover all of those themes, but I began by asking him to respond to Donald Trump's stated ambition to ethnically cleanse Gaza and have the United States take control of the Strip.
Where does one start to express one's horror, amusement, a combination of the two? In one fell swoop, he destroyed international law, the Geneva Conventions, everything that the West supposedly treasured since 1945. The establishment of the principle that you don't just announce that you're going to annex somebody else's territory. But then again, we must never forget that Donald Trump likes to troll us. He baits us. He says things that are intentionally outrageous to destabilize us. And we must not succumb to the temptation to become destabilized. The facts on the ground are very clear. We have a state of apartheid in Israel. Since 1948, we've had an ongoing process of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. This has evolved into a fully blown genocide. Trump was making those remarks with the criminally indicted Netanyahu sitting next to him. Netanyahu has a very long history, 20, 25 years, of wiping the floor clean with every American president that he worked with, essentially ridiculing them, running rings around them, and destroying any possibility of a two-state solution, or trying to destroy it, very efficiently, I must add. And there comes Trump with his recruitment strategy for MAGA, which is to outrage everyone, to destabilize us. But that strategy coalesces beautifully, resonates beautifully with, or horribly, with Netanyahu's project of destroying the Palestinian people, of destroying the chances of Israeli Jews to live peacefully, to live safely within Israel in a state of peace. So I am struggling to restrain myself from being outraged, because my outrage is Trump's success and part of his recruitment policy for MAGA, as I mentioned. We need unity amongst progressives all over the world, especially in Israel. We need not to lose sight of the amazing work that South Africa has been doing in utilizing international law and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice to restore faith in humanity, in our own capacity to do something about the genocide which is unfolding in real time on our screens.
And I mean, do you think we should take it at all seriously? Because I suppose with Trump, there's a tendency to think he is just sort of flooding the zone with shit. I mean, he can't sort of say, let's ethnically cleanse Gaza and it happened, because he would need Egypt or Jordan or someone else on side, right? Because the Americans aren't going to take all of these people. So do you think he's almost trying to distract us from a sort of more realistic plan? Or do you think it is sort of important for us to take him at his word and say, this is really outrageous?
We have to be dialectical. We have to combine simultaneously a capacity to listen seriously to what he says. So, for instance, when he was going on about taking over Canada, at first, most Canadians thought it was a joke. And then we realized that it wasn't a joke, that he actually meant it. And there are repercussions to that. Even if he doesn't actually take over Canada, you can see that from his perspective, from his electoral basis perspective, he's already won a small victory, but nevertheless a victory, by humiliating the Canadians, by forcing them to the table with his tariffs. So he has this strategy of being intentionally outrageous, of causing you either to not take seriously what he says, which is a mistake, or to take too seriously what he says, which is also a mistake. He creates this kerfuffle. And then, however, he's also shown signs in the past of settling for something far smaller than that which he had pronounced, proclaimed, and demanded.
And I wanted to talk to you specifically about the tariffs, really, because there's something interesting about the way Donald Trump speaks, because he's always complaining about surplus countries, so countries with a trade surplus basically exploiting everyone else, right? And that is, on the face of it, one of his justifications for these tariffs. So Canada does have a surplus with the United States, so does Mexico, so does China, and so does the EU, which seems like that's why those are his sort of four big priorities. Obviously, he's now sort of paused the Canada and Mexico one, so it's all a little bit confusing. But where I was going with this is that you yourself, and both when you were sort of Greek finance minister and in your book, The Global Miner Tour before that, you were also very critical of countries that ran consistent trade surpluses for a similar reason, right? You thought that they were kind of exploiting other countries for their own benefit. Do you have something in common with Donald Trump on this?
Let me slightly rephrase your expression before I sink in the depths of depression by the comparison with Donald Trump. I have never said that countries that have a consistent, permanent surplus with other countries are exploiting them for their own benefit. My criticism, for instance, in the context of the European Union, of the German trade surpluses, not only vis-à-vis the United States, but also vis-à-vis the United Kingdom and Greece, is that ultimately they are bad for the people of Germany. They are universally bad. They are doing damage both to the countries that have a deficit in relation to, but also to Germany itself. I am happy to repeat this for China. I do believe that these perpetual large surpluses that China is reporting, is creating, are in the end a form of class war within China, with the majority of the Chinese suffering as a result. So I reject wholeheartedly the zero-sum approach of Donald Trump, that whatever is in the interest of, or whatever does damage to the Americans must be in the interest of Germany or of China. That is rubbish. For me, you see, let me put it simply, in ways that I think particularly leftists will understand. For me, trade wars are class wars. Therefore, it's not a clash between Germany and Greece, or China and the United States, or the European Union and the United States. It's a clash, a major clash, between the rentier class of the United States and the blue-collar workers of the United States, and also within Germany of the industrialists and the bankers on the one hand, and the German working class on the other. And so the true evil in what Donald Trump is doing is that, like every good fascist, when I say good, I mean consistent fascist, he's basing what he says on small truths in order to tell a big lie. So the small truth, or small truths, is that indeed a system of imbalanced trade, where you have Germany having a very large and almost permanent trade surplus with the south of Europe, with the United States, with the United Kingdom, that is unsustainable, and it is bad. But it is bad for the Germans, I would add, as I did. So this is the small truth. It's not a small truth, it's a sizable truth. But then he builds the grievances of the United States story on top of it, which is the big lie. the big fascist lie, I would say, because fascists are very good. I mean, Goebbels had developed a whole theory of propaganda on how to tell a big lie by basing it on truths. What is his profession, Donald Trump? He's a realtor. He's in the real estate business. Now, why is the real estate business in the United States so lucrative? Why has he made all these billions? And there are other developers who are even more successful than he is. Why is the rentier sector in the United States booming when the working class is suffering? The working class that, by the way, ironically elected Donald Trump, one of the realtors. Well, the reason is the trade deficit of the United States. Because the trade deficit of the United States, the fact that it has been deindustrializing, all the things that he correctly points out as a problem, this trade deficit becomes the engine that drives German industry, Japanese industry, Chinese industry. If you are an aluminum producer in Shanghai, you sell most of your produce to California. How can the Californians afford to buy your aluminum? Only because the American dollar permits American consumers of aluminum to use the power of the dollar to keep importing aluminum from Shanghai to California. In other words, the trade, that's what I mean when I say that the trade deficit of the United States is the source of demand and therefore of accumulation, of capital accumulation by the capitalists of the rest of the world. Now, what do they do with the dollars that they collect? They take it to New York through the banking system, Wall Street. They're not allowed to buy large companies like Microsoft, Google, and so on, because the United States government is very protectionist. But they are allowed to use their dollars that are the result of the American trade deficit to do two things. Buy real estate. That answers the question, why is somebody like Donald Trump rich? Because of the trade deficit of the United States, and buy American bonds, effectively American government debt, in the sense that the Chinese, the Japanese, the British, the Italian, the German capitalists are funding the American state and the American army. So you can't have it both ways, Donald Trump. You cannot, on the one hand, enjoy and celebrate your wealth, celebrate the fact that you have the world's mightiest army, and at the same time, not like the trade deficit, which makes this possible.
Because I mischaracterized your argument, let me try and sort of make sure I have got what you really mean. So the reason why a trade surplus is bad for the working class in, say, Germany or Japan is because to maintain a trade surplus, you have to suppress demand in that country. So sort of they're artificially suppressing wages in Germany to maintain the surplus. The reason it's problematic for Americans is that it will sort of deindustrialize that country. And you've also sort of explained that how it could cause asset inflation. Am I on the right track?
Precisely. You got it spot on.
So this does, though, lead to another question. So how, regardless of what's motivating Donald Trump, how should other countries respond? Because if sort of your argument is that sort of Germany having this surplus is problematic, China having this surplus is problematic, what they should actually just do is sort of inflate demand in their countries so that the working classes in those nations can have a better standard of living. Should, in a way, should we be telling the EU, this trade war from the Americans, it might have been motivated by sort of faulty or opportunistic logic by a very nasty person, but maybe you should take this as a wake-up call and you should sort of try and reduce your trade surplus with America. Is that what we should be sort of asking? Because I suppose the other option is to say, look, this is when we should stand together as Europeans against the Americans because they are trying to take us for a ride.
I think this is not an either or situation, it's both. By the way, what you said is what I've been saying now for decades, going blue in the face saying it. Part and parcel of the trade surplus of the Eurozone in relation to the United States is not only the suppression of demand, but also the suppression of investment. This emphasis on competitiveness that the Germans have, this fixation with competitiveness, it's almost a psychological disease. It goes hand in hand with low productivity, because these are two very different terms. You can become competitive by cutting wages, but you don't become more productive. and you don't become more innovative. In order to, and competitiveness is a fool's wager. It is in the definition of a zero-sum game. So if I cut my wages relative to yours and I become more competitive relative to you, okay, I win, you lose. It's a zero-sum game. But nothing stops both of us from being more productive. But to be more productive, we need more investment. But when you run consistent, perpetual trade surpluses, as you said correctly, you reduce your demand domestically, which means you reduce your investment, because who's going to invest in a country where demand is low? So what Europe should have been doing, and this is what I was arguing 10 years ago when I was in the corridors of power in inverted commas in Brussels, and when I was in the ECOFIN, the Council of Finance Ministers, so when I was governor of the European Investment Bank, I was saying, folks, we need to boost investment in Europe. And that is going to rebalance our trade as well. It will reduce our reliance on net exports, because that reliance is so catastrophic for Europe. You can see it now. You have a European economy which cannot generate enough demand within itself and relies on net exports to the United States and China, therefore increasing our dependence on the goodwill of the Chinese and Donald Trump. And the only way of doing that would be to find a way of, and there were very straightforward forward ways of doing that, of channeling all the accumulating liquidity in the banking system of Europe into productive investments. I will give you a very simple example that I've been advocating for now for, I think, 30 years. We have something called the European Investment Bank. It's there. It's in Luxembourg. It can do things. It's functioning. It's not a bad institution, actually. It's quite an efficient one. Imagine if there was another announcement saying that the EIB, the European Investment Bank, is going to issue 500 billion, half a trillion euros worth of its own bonds, which it already is issuing, and it will have the European Central Bank behind it in case those bonds prices start falling. That simple announcement would mean that they would sell like hotcakes, and then you would have half a trillion euros every year to invest in digital technology, in green energy, in the green transition, in all those things that we don't have and we desperately need in Europe. And that would have rebalanced our trade books as well, and it would have made us less dependent on Trump. But of course, the powers that be in Europe were not interested in that. They were only interested in the zero-sum game, in, cutting our nose to spite our face, in introducing austerity for the people of Greece, and then for the people of Ireland, for the people of Portugal. So in a sense, Europe committed suicide, and Trump comes in, looks at Europe bleeding on the floor, and pokes fun at us.
I mean, let's talk about how the Europeans, in fact, sound like they're going to respond. So there was an article in the Financial Times today saying the Europeans are prepared to sort of target the American tech giants. They called it first use of a Brussels bazooka. So it's sounding very scary. I know you're no big fan of the American tech giants. Is using a Brussels bazooka against them a sort of reasonable response to Donald Trump if he were to apply tariffs to the European Union, as seems likely?
Since he was re-elected, the situation on the ground in Europe politically has been pathetic, miserable. The very stalwarts of the liberal establishment, from Macron to Scholz to the whole gamut of the European radical center, as I call them, okay, who were aghast at the thought that Trump might win, suddenly became all Trumpists. They started indulging in this pathetic and contemptible race between them as to who would be the first to leak the great Donald Trump's boots. That was the first response, since you talked about responses. Now that they realize that, this guy actually meant it when he said that he was going to slap tariffs on EU exports, now they start trying to present themselves as tenacious and feisty. And they start talking about retaliation against the United States. Well, Michael, you can't retaliate when you are running a large trade surplus and you depend on it. So whatever they do to the big tech, techno-feudal lords, as I call them, of Silicon Valley, and I believe that they should have done a lot worse to them than what they are thinking of doing now. But it is irrelevant, because the problem that Germany has, the problem that France has, the problem that Italy has, is that capital, serious money, is migrating from Europe and is being invested in the United States. There is nothing that Brussels can do, tweaking the regulations for artificial intelligence and what Google can do or can't do, and what penalties they will make Google or Microsoft pay. None of that is going to stop this emigration, this tsunami of capital leaving Germany, leaving the heart of Europe for the United States. Now, this is not new. It's been happening for years now because of the of what we were saying, what I was talking about before. Even Biden's America First industrial policy that was misnamed as the Inflation Reduction Act had already started the process of companies like Volkswagen, like BASF, the great chemical corporation, shifting its investment to the United States. And now the prospect of these tariffs simply accelerates this process. So when I look at Brussels and their pronouncements as to how they're going to deal with Trump, what I see is this pendulum of shame oscillating very fast between total capitulation to Washington and idiotic and utterly unbelievable threats.
Let's talk about techno-feudalism. So we sort of talked about trade imbalances and what you've written about that in the past, how that relates to now. I mean, techno-feudalism, your most recent book, you're sort of talking about how a few global tech firms are essentially controlling the entire economy and can tax every transaction we do. I think it's a strong argument. Were you celebrating sort of the rise of DeepSeek because that seemed to threaten the monopolistic power of those Silicon Valley, the AI giants at least?
Absolutely. I think it's a remarkable achievement. And I don't care whether it's Chinese, Eskimo, Norwegian, or Malaysian. Whoever created on a shoestring a competitor to that awful OpenAI's ChatGPT, which has a market capitalization that is mind-boggling. And the reason why it's mind-boggling, it is because of all the fees they were expecting to get from you and me for using what is a very useful tool, by the way. Okay, I'm not at all a tech skeptic. I believe that this technology is potentially extremely useful. And then you have this Chinese company, and at 1,000th of the cost, they produced a product which is even more useful than the American one. So this was a Sputnik moment. The Americans were absolutely convinced, both the American government, the American private sector, big tech, were convinced that they were, decades ahead of the rest of the world, of China. And suddenly, just like in the 50s, when the Soviets went to space before the Americans could launch a rocket, now they realize that this supposed heads up that they had was immaterial. And it destroyed their business model, which I'm very pleased to see, because as a Democrat, I believe in open source software. And what is astonishing about DeepSeek is not only that they are providing us with a service, and it's free, something that to get a similar quality of service from OpenAI, you would have to pay $200 a month. It's not only that, it's that they have published and made available to you and me, to everyone, especially to techies who are useful people unlike us. They provide them with the code. They said, look, this is how we made it. You can take it and make it yourself. And you can use it in any way you want. You don't have to store your data on our Chinese servers or on Google servers. Buy your own server and store your data there. Now, so yes, of course, that was a remarkable moment. But that is in no way denting the ironclad powers of what I call the cloud capital, which is the foundation of what I call techno-feudalism. Because what's inside our phone, and it's most powerful, is not an AI-based service. An AI-based service like ChatGPT or DeepSeek is a capitalist commodity. Like, it is no different to going to a restaurant and ordering a pizza. You order a commodity, you pay for it. Maybe it's given to you for free if somebody is nice enough, as DeepSeek are, but it's still a marketplace. The real power of big tech resides in Google, resides in Facebook, it resides in Instagram, in TikTok, in Airbnb, in Uber, these what I call digital fiefdoms, because they're like fiefdoms that attract us. And once we're in there, we don't pay to get in there. You simply sign up, like you do when you use the Google search engine, when you enter Facebook and start posting articles or photographs or whatever. You get in there as a consumer, as a user, or as a producer, as Novara, you get in there, as the Times of London, as a bicycle producer who enters Amazon. Jeff Bezos' digital fiefdom. So we are all gathered inside the digital walls of this fiefdom, and once we're in there, we get charged a rent. Just like in the feudal age, the landlords charged ground rent. These people, the tech lords, charge a cloud rent. And that's not a market. It's not a marketplace. It's a trading platform, but it is encased, it's owned like the landlords used to own the estates, the great estates. Now they own those digital fiefs. And once we're in there, we produce value for them. We reproduce their own cloud capital every time we post a video, a photograph. And that is not affected by a company like DeepSeek. Company like DeepSeek only wrecks the business model of companies like OpenAI that sell services for money.
The feudal analogy, I think, when it comes to these companies. I mean, if you work on this, obviously Novara Media, we work, as you say, within the walls of one of these platforms. YouTube take 45% of all ad revenue, right? And all they have to do is maintain the website. There's an enormous amount of rent that they are sort of consuming, which is why you can see how these companies become so profitable. Briefly on DeepSeek, because I know you sort of said you're a fan of open source. I mean, I am too. I do also, I understand the argument sort of about AI being dangerous and sort of, with nuclear weapons, right? We might sort of, in theory, like things to be open source, but you don't want the proliferation of nuclear weapons to any Tom, Dick and Harry who can sort of get their hands on them, right? So if AI, or I suppose, let's pose this as a question, do you take seriously those people who think that sort of AI proliferation could be a risk or even an existential risk to humanity?
Yes and no. You see, AI in itself is a very useful tool. Nuclear power, or energy, I don't think is a very good analogy because it's radioactive. So even if you try to use it for good purposes, you may get contaminated and get cancer. Whereas if you take DeepSeek's code and you use it in order to, as a musician, for instance, to come up with interesting compositions coming out of previous projects of yours or your friends' projects, there's no danger there of anything bad or ill happening to you or to your friends. So when it comes to cloud capital, artificial intelligence, algorithms, the key is who owns it. Not what is the machine capable of doing, but who owns it. Because when you have highly concentrated ownership, when AI is owned by Altman, right, who has proven to be not just a maverick, but a villain of the piece, and he can control all the learning that is based, and taking place in front of the eyes of young people. He can control everything they learn through the way that he programs it, and because he owns it, there's no way of checking how it is that he's programmed it. Then it becomes a clear and present danger to humanity. But if it is open source, then you can have access to a variety of different forms of AI. And in the end, the concentration of ownership rights is going to fizzle out. And as the concentration of ownership over these machines and algorithms and AI, bots, and so on fizzles out, then their power to do ill and harm also fizzles out.
I mean, in a way, one way of interpreting that answer is you don't take the sort of traditional ideas of existential threat very seriously, because, the people like Geoffrey Hinton, say, who was at DeepMind with Google, he's worried that these AI machines will get smarter than us and then enslave us. And then you've got other people sort of more security-minded who think that this is going to potentially make it much easier for, any kind of militant to create a chemical bioweapon or something like that. You're not really concerned about that. Your main concern is the extent to which AI can concentrate power among a few individuals.
You're right. I'm not worried about AI. I'm worried about humans. I'm worried about bad people, not bad machines. So the question is, who owns the machines and who can turn them against us and against themselves in the end, in a Frankenstein kind of Mary Shelley way. In the end, they can be tragic victims of their own hubris. So, no, I'm not worried about technology. I'm not worried about the machine itself. I'm worried about the highly unequal distribution of control and ownership over the machines. When I was beginning to write my book, which you kindly mentioned, Techno-Feudalism, the first thought that came to my mind was in response to your question. Science fiction is always, for me, a great guide in understanding the present, not so much the future, and what we must do in order to avert catastrophe. So if you look at all the Terminator movies, okay, the Terminator movies are all founded on this existentialist angst, the fear, and also The Matrix, if you remember that great movie of the early 1990s. The fear that at some point the machines will reach the point of singularity, which is when they become conscious, and they will realize what a silly bunch of idiots we humans are, and how imperfect and corrosive for the planet are, and they turn against us. I'm not worried about that. My book was all about the fact that a singularity of sorts has already taken place. That those machines, even though they don't have consciousness, and I don't think they will have consciousness for a very, very, very long time, if ever, they've already managed to create, on behalf of their owners, so much exorbitant power that they essentially killed capitalism while we were otherwise engaged with other projects and other concerns.
Do you think the left is still relevant in this moment? I think lots of people sort of looking around in terms of world politics. I mean, there are some exceptions, Mexico, of course, being a big one. But people look around the world, they say, it seems like the battle is between the populist nativist right and a struggling center. There was obviously, a moment, you were a big figurehead in it, where it seemed like left populism was a big deal and it was a sort of shaping force within politics. You could sort of talk meaningfully about left populism being an alternative to right populism. That moment seems to be somewhat over. You could say the left appear at a low ebb, at least in the West. Do you agree with that? I mean, how are you sort of looking on the state of the left and progressive politics in the world right now?
Well, in exactly like the mid-war period, when the left lost, the left failed, the result was that the discontent caused by the crisis of this exploitative system we live in, call it what you may, the loss of the left, the failure of the left, in conjunction with the crisis and the discontent that the crisis begot, led to the rise of the fascists. And then you had this clash back in the 1930s between the Weimar liberal establishment and the fascists. And in the end, the Weimar liberal establishment rolled over and essentially paved the ground for the fascists. I see what is happening, what has been happening since our generation's 1929, which happened in 2008, again in Wall Street. I see a repetition of what happened, not as a farce, as Marx would have hoped, but as a postmodern version of it. There is this basic similarity. There are differences, of course, but you're quite right. The left will always be relevant, as long as there is an unequal distribution of property rights over the means of production, distribution, and now communication. As long as you have this exploitative relationship between the owners of the machines and the others, the vast majority who do not own machines and therefore have to submit themselves to the owners of the machines, as long as there is this incongruity, clash within the fabric of our society, the left will always be relevant. The question is, will the left be able to organize the many so that the common interest of the majority of the people, which exists, which is clearly in existence, can find political expression? As long as we're not doing it, we're going to be sandwiched between the authoritarianism of the fascists, of the Trumpists, of the Nationalist International, whatever you may call them, and the authoritarianism of the liberal establishment, of the radical center, of the Keir Starmers, of the Emmanuel Macrons of the world.
My final question was going to be about Keir Starmer, and I wasn't going to ask you how he's doing because I thought that question would be a bit too easy, actually. So I'm going to ask you, should the left want Keir Starmer to succeed or to fail?
Well, to succeed in doing what? Firstly, I don't believe that Keir Starmer has a smidgen of an iota of an idea of what he really wants to do except being prime minister. It's not clear from his manifesto. I mean, there are just platitudes. Growth. He doesn't tell us what he wants to see growing, how he's going to achieve it. What I see in Keir Starmer from the first moment that he misled the membership of the Labour Party by promising them a continuation of the progressive 2019 manifesto, which he ditched immediately after that, betraying the people who voted for him to become the leader of the Labour Party. What I have seen him doing ever since was to expunge from Labour, from the Parliamentary Labour Party, from the grassroots organizations of Labour, all progressive forces, and to do it in a ruthless way, to do it also in a way which is supportive, and that is symbolic, importantly symbolic, of the genocide that's happening in Palestine. And in the end, I very much fear that his success will be detrimental to the interests of the working class, of the middle class, of civilized society in the United Kingdom and beyond. So this government needs to be treated with the contempt and anger that it deserves from the people who care about the people that Keir Starmer claims to care about, the working people.
I suppose the danger then is, though, if Keir Starmer loses the next election, it's either Nigel Farage or the Tories, right? So I suppose I think people are in a difficult situation right now, basically. But you think, sort of for principled reasons, just the guy's awful and we should will for him to fail. I mean, what would the pragmatist do in this situation? What is the hope, let's say? Is it to sort of start a party further to the left and try and sort of eke out an existence there? Or what would you recommend?
Well, Michael, look, let's say that you and I and everybody that's watching us on Novara Media, we all decide to be responsible and forget about our radical thinking and ideology. And in order to stop Farage and Braverman and the Tory riffraff getting back in, we back Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to the hilt, right? They are going to fail because they are a miserable lot. You only have to look at every single decision Rachel Reeves has made. She remarkably and astonishingly prevented her own team from refurbishing the rules by which the Bank of England remunerates the City of London bankers when it comes to the reserves that they keep at the Bank of England. Do you know what this means? It means that she has effectively gifted the City of London, the bankers, she's gifted them about 35 to 40 billion a year. All it took was a signature not to gift them money that they never earned and they should never have, while at the same time increasing the national insurance contributions by 25 billion and wrecking any chance of a serious increase in wages and maybe some increases in employment. So she doesn't need our opposition in order to guarantee her failure. So these people are failing. And they are failing as a result of not having the guts or the analytical power to oppose the City of London bankers, for instance, to do something about channeling all the excess liquidity in the financial circuits in Britain into productive investments. They keep talking about investment, but they are doing absolutely nothing. Yeah, they're talking about a third runway, for goodness sake, which is maybe ecologically catastrophic, but it is macroeconomically absolutely relevant. Absolutely relevant. So it doesn't really matter what you and I do, whether we support them. They are working for Farage. The reason why Farage is sort of edging above Labour in the latest opinion polls is because of Labour. It's not because you and I have not supported them to the hilt. So my answer to your question is straightforward. We should prepare for the calamity that they are driving themselves into. And the only way to do that, since you can't do it in the Labour Party, because if you are in the Labour Party and you do not succumb to their vile authoritarianism, you're thrown out. Look at Jeremy Corbyn, my friend, and look at even John McDonnell, who tries so hard to stay, another friend of mine, within, but there's no space in the Labour Party in which to be progressive and smart at the same time. So the answer to the question is yes, we need a new force. I would very much like to see the Independents, Jeremy, the Greens, not necessarily form a party, but collaborate, find a way of creating an electoral vehicle which will be able to pronounce a combination of rationality and progressivism that will be absolutely necessary for the time when the Tories, Reform, maybe some other dark forces emerge in order to rule that country.